Welcome to the Payoff Pitch presented by D&L Window Tinting on Fanimal Radio. I'm Paul Valley. And last night the Orioles lost a ball game that was back and forth, a lot of home runs from both sides. They lost 8-5 last night to drop their record to 13-23. David Hess, for the fifth time in 7 starts, failed to make it past the 5th inning. In fact, he failed to make it past the 4th inning in last night's ball game and raised his ERA to 5.5 after allowing 4 walks with 5 strikeouts and 2 long home runs to put the Orioles in an early deficit that they kept trying to claw back from but never quite made it. Dwight Smith Jr., a couple more hits last night. He had snapped a 5-game hitting streak the night before, but then last night started a new one, hitting .295 this year, so his bat's really playing in the middle of that Orioles lineup. Evan Phillips, not pitching particularly well lately. A lot of walks. Last night he came in the 9th inning with the Orioles just down by a run after a 2-run rally in the 8th, and he negated that rally, walking 2 batters, hitting a batter, and allowing a base hit. The Orioles ended up losing 8-5. They couldn't put together a rally in the 9th inning, and it probably made it that much more difficult since a 1-run lead was taken to a 3-run lead. Moving forward, the main thing I want to talk about in the first segment of our show before we have our guest on today is what's been going on in the media recently. As many of you know, the Orioles and the Nationals have been in a heated feud over the Mid-Atlantic Sports Network, as many of us know them as MASN. Since 2012, actually, this feud has been going on. And basically, just to kind of sum it up, Peter Angelos was the only owner that voted against the Expos coming to Washington to become the Nationals in 2005, and he threatened to sue the league because it was taking away a third of the Orioles market. So in order to appease Peter Angelos, Major League Baseball allowed him to start the Mid-Atlantic Sports Network and gave him the lion's share of ownership. 79% of MASN is owned by the Orioles, with just 21% owned by the Nationals. Well, since 2012, the Nationals have been taking the Orioles to court, trying to get more money out of the deal. The Orioles have been saying, we're not paying you. Nationals won the dispute. Orioles appealed. The Orioles won the dispute. The Nationals appealed, and more recently, actually just before this past weekend, the Nationals won the latest dispute, and an arbitrator awarded $100 million to the Nationals from the Orioles, basically paying him $20 million a year over the last 5 years. Now, the Orioles are going to have to appeal it. They're actually going to have to restate their financial results for those 5 years, as reported by Jeff Barker for the Baltimore Sun. So it would probably be more like 60 to 70 million, but even still, that's a huge chunk of change that the Orioles got to pay the Nationals. And the Orioles are worried that it is an economically unsustainable 5% margin of profit for the network if this is to be allowed to stand. So the Orioles are probably going to appeal this decision. Now, I'm no authority on the issue. I tried to get Jeff Barker, who wrote the article last week, on, but he had a deadline to meet, so he couldn't make it on the show this week. We will try to get him on at some point to discuss this at greater length. But the thing I want to talk the most about is that following this decision, Bruce Cunningham had a show on Saturday on 105.7 The Fan, and he had his personal attorney, Benjamin Neal, on the program. And they were talking about this dispute. And Benjamin Neal said that there is an anonymous bid from somebody for the Orioles for $3 billion from somebody who wants to move the ball club to Las Vegas. And admittedly, I was one of the people that freaked out over this. I posted a couple tweets saying how this would be soul-crushing for me. And in fact, one of our writers on our senior editor, Derek Arnold, posted an article on Utah Street Report and quoted 2 of my tweets in there. A lot of backlash, a lot of people calling people stupid and chastising them for thinking that the Orioles could ever move to Las Vegas. And I think that's completely wrong. Over the 4 major sports since 1966, 33 teams have relocated cities. You know that the Colts left Baltimore in the middle of the night and went to Indianapolis in the NFL. We know that the Nationals came here in 2005 from Montreal. The Atlanta Braves started in Boston, then went to Milwaukee, then went to Atlanta. The Athletics started in Kansas City, went to Philadelphia, and then went to Oakland. So this sort of thing is not heard of, and they only need 75% of the vote from owners to make this thing happen. That being said, the Orioles aren't a small market. They're a mid-market. They're smaller because of the Nationals. But one of the main reasons that the Orioles aren't going anywhere is because of that crown jewel that is Camden Yards. There's no way in hell that Major League Baseball is going to allow that ballpark to stay vacant. With that being said, there is no reason to chastise people for fearing this because it's happened before. It's happened in Baltimore, losing the Colts and gaining the Ravens, causing Cleveland to lose the Browns. People have a right to be afraid. Most fans, the average fan, doesn't know what it takes to relocate a professional sports team. I've heard other podcasts refer to fans as stupid, actually say, we all know fans are stupid. You were never going to hear a blanket statement like that on this program. Fans are not stupid. Fans just want to know. The fans come from fanatics. People want to know what's going on. They're passionate about their sports team. And there's a lot of people, myself included, that if the Orioles ever left Baltimore, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves. There's nothing wrong with having a knee-jerk reaction and being scared of this because somebody on a credible radio station came out and said that this was a thing that could happen. So I apologize for my knee-jerk reaction, but I think that a lot of people probably had the same thing, and it's okay if you did because it's a scary prospect to think about losing your team. Still, I think that lease will be renewed between the Maryland Stadium Authority, Camden Yards, and the Baltimore Orioles. It runs out after 2021, but there's no way that the Orioles aren't going to be playing in Camden Yards. And even if they do leave, there's no way there's not going to be another team playing here. So, it's okay. Orioles aren't going anywhere, but if you felt like they were, that's okay too. All right. With that being said, I have a great guest who's coming on the show after we get a word from our sponsor. We're going to talk strictly Orioles baseball, no more of this Masson dispute, no more about relocating teams to Masson. Just going to talk baseball with the Baltimore Sun's Jon Meoli. Really great guest coming up. But first, a word from our sponsor. In your home, sunshine can stream in through windows, bringing a cheerful feel and warmness to any room. Sometimes, though, it brings in too much warmth, even harmful ultraviolet light and solar energy that can raise energy bills, drain the color from your fabrics and furnishings, and cast a blinding glare on your television or computer screens. D&L Window Tinting can protect your home from all of this while saving you money on energy bills. Start saving today by calling D&L at 410-941-2942. That's 410-941-2942. Welcome back to the Payoff Pitch on Fanimal Radio. And joining me today from the Baltimore Sun is Jon Meoli. Jon, how are we doing today, man?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
We're pleased to have you, man. I consider you to be the cream of the crop when it comes to Orioles writers, so we're really excited to have you on the show today. Orioles, 13-23 after that loss to the Red Sox last night. What are some of your observations on the ball club this year? They're 4 games ahead of last year's pace, which is good. What have you seen from this club so far this season?
It's been interesting. Whenever anybody asks me, I basically tell them, they're still not very good, but it's a little more fun. Last year's season at this time, every time they lost in April and May, it was like, oh my gosh, this is a team that they might have been the only ones that thought it, but they thought they could really make the playoffs last year. They made a lot of moves towards that end, and it just collapsed before they could even really get started. This year, there's no such expectations. There's players who are, in different positions in their career and a little more willing to roll with the season like this, a little more willing to deal with these losses, and it just feels like there's a little more energy, there's a little more excitement even with those losses, and I think that's what stood out to me, having dealt with pretty similar circumstances last year.
Right, and speaking of last year, you wrote a lengthy article that was basically about the pulse of the locker room during those losing months, and it kind of gave a sense of a downtrodden atmosphere in the locker room, for lack of a better term. What do you see from the Orioles locker room this year that differs, if it differs at all, from last year?
Well, I think it all comes down, and I talked a lot actually during the offseason, spring training, talked to Mark Trumbo about this a lot. It just comes down to expectations. When the expectation is that every loss is a crushing one, then every loss is a crushing one. And when the expectation is that, if you're in your first, second, third year in the big leagues and you're part of a team and that team's mandate is to go out there and, give as sincere an effort as they can and, just let it ride. If that's good enough for a win that night, that's good. If not, then, you show up the next day. I think they're really a lot more willing to just kind of let a loss sit on the day that it happened. They're not going to show up today on Wednesday acting like and feeling like they lost on Tuesday. They're just showing up for a game, just like they have to do every day. And I think that's the biggest difference. They're not saddled with the fact that, last year's team left spring training, having signed Alex Cobb, having signed Andrew Kashner, having re-signed Chris Tillman for whatever that meant. with all these guys who are about to leave and knowing they had to make one last run at a playoff spot. They have no such expectations. They have no such ambitions on a larger level other than for all these guys to just get better every single day. And I think that's the main difference.
Well, and I think that it can't be understated that the Orioles have one of the youngest rosters in baseball right now, and you can't tell kids that what they can and cannot do. These guys go out there every night, and they may not expect to win a ton of ball games, but they're not going to go out there and just accept losing. And with that in mind, there's a couple other young guys that could be coming up to the Orioles in the near or not too distant future, for a better term there. And you wrote an article about possible call-ups for the Orioles. We saw with Austin Hayes, Yusniel Diaz, Chance Sisco, Ryan Mountcastle all getting sent down in spring after having fairly decent spring trainings, that the new regime in Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal, Brandon Hyde, they don't necessarily care about results during spring training. They want to see what they can do at the minor league level for extended period. With that in mind, and with the rebuild in full swing, is it expected that those guys can be called up this year? Guys like Mountcastle, guys like Keegan Aiken, or should we expect them to stay at the minor leagues for an extended period?
That's something that I've been trying to figure out. I went back and looked at a lot of the what you would expect to be, precedents from the Astros with Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal coming from over there. And it's really hard to say. I think that guys who are on the roster at this point, your Austin Hayes, your Chance Sisco, Cedric Mullins once he gets back, I think those guys are going to be the first ones you see. The moves the Orioles have had to make in terms of adding players to the 40-man roster this year, they've added Matt Wallace. I can never figure it. They added whichever Matt or Mark Wotherspoon it was. They added Josh Lucas, and those were guys that were just as quickly off the roster as they're on it. I don't think that they're going to be, adding a Ryan Mountcastle and starting his service time clock, adding a Yusniel Diaz and starting their service time clock until they really feel a need to. Austin Hayes is going to use his second minor league option this year. He's already used it once he comes off the disabled list or injured list. And granted, he'll probably get an extra one just because of when he was added. But, this is all stuff that matters for an organization that's looking 3-4 years down the road. Now, if guys are just tearing it up in AAA, I think they'll force the issue. But people have only done that for a week and a month at a time now. And until then, it's hard to say exactly when those things are going to happen.
Right, and I would expect somebody like Ryan Mountcastle to stay down at the minor league level longer, simply because of the fact that they're transitioning him to a new position. They want to figure out a position for the guy instead of just having him be a universal DH. And that alone is going to have growing pains. So the defense may not be major league ready while the bat is. So he could stay down there longer. I would tend to agree with you.
And I haven't seen him or talked to anyone who's been down to Norfolk this year, but when I was looking at his stats for that piece I did on Monday, he already has 5 errors. And if you're playing first base and you have 5 errors, I don't know what that means, but that's kind of a red flag. All you got to do is really catch the ball when it's thrown to you at that position. So
Right. So and that was always his MO when he was playing over at third base, was that he had the arm, but the glove was lacking. So probably stay down there for the majority of the season, I would imagine. Just like Keegan Aiken, he might be the next arm that you would think to call on, but he spent a full season every minor league level. Do you see him coming up at any point this year? Do you think that's somebody that they'll save for September or maybe next spring?
He could be. That could end up being a September later season thing. I think it was really interesting that he didn't get brought over to Major League Camp as a non-roster invite this year. The starting pitcher who was in that was Dean Kramer, who was also pretty successful last year at Double-A Bowie. He ended up getting hurt in spring training. I think he's pretty close to making his debut for Bowie coming back up. But it was pretty interesting to see that someone like Keegan Aiken, who had the success that he didn't get that chance and is just going to be a guy who, honestly, when he comes up, there's not going to be a lot of familiarity with him. So that's something that you wonder if there's a different view of him from the new front office versus the old one. Right.
And, Keegan Aiken, big left-handed starter, put up big numbers, was the Orioles co-minor league pitcher of the year last year along with Zach Lowther. You wrote an article about Dallas Keuchel being a blueprint for O's lefties in the minors. But as you tweeted the other day, you didn't have John Means on that list in that article. You didn't even have him in your top prospects. And he's kind of come on like a lightning rod here recently. how do you feel about Jon Means? Do you feel he has staying power, or do you think he needs to have more than just that dominating changeup?
Well, how do I feel about him? Like, I'm really happy for him. I've gotten to know a lot of scouts over the years, and some of them have talked to me about how they've sat together at Jon Means' starts, and I think it was Norfolk last year, just being like, this is a guy who you want it to work out for, but like it's just not. He's like one step below where he needs to be. He was a guy who's throwing like, high 80s, topping out at 90 miles an hour from the left side without really a put away pitch. He goes away, he gets stronger, he adds some velocity. His changeup comes, takes a huge leap, becomes a legitimate major league out pitch, and all of a sudden you have the guy that he is right now. So kudos to him for looking at what he was and looking at what he was doing and what it was going to take for him to get to the level he wanted to get to and actually doing it. People feel that way. I wrote about all those lefties because anyone around baseball, that's what it's, instead of evaluating, and for better or worse, instead of evaluating on their merits, every single guy, people who evaluate, for a living will see a guy like Jon Means, a guy like Keegan Aiken, although there's a little more velocity there, a guy like Zach Lowther, a guy like Alex Wells, and they're like, pitchability lefty. Like, he's got to do it at every level. He's got to show that he can get guys out in the big leagues before anyone will think he does. And that's just how it works. So he kind of overcame that. Now, is there the staying power? I think there was a pretty good indication of what he's going to do to try to stay in that start against the Red Sox. He mentioned after he's pitched against Chicago last week that, a team that had already seen him once and who he pitched really well against wasn't offering at all at his changeup, like in the lower half. They basically knew if it looked like a changeup, if it was, he's throwing the high fastball, and if the ball was looking low, it was going to be a changeup, and they just weren't going to swing. They didn't swing at all at it. So what he came back and did was throw a lot more breaking balls, just kind of mix it up. Now, he was a breaking ball guy as his primary, secondary pitch in the minors. Didn't work out nearly as well as it has with him throwing a changeup more often, but it's just something else for hitters to think about. It's something else for him to do that can keep them off balance. And I think that's the next step. Teams are starting to make the adjustment. They know that he's going to throw the fastball up and he's going to try to get them changeups. Now it's what he does to kind of combat that.
Right, and any good team is going to make adjustments to a young pitcher once they have tape on him. And it's nice to see that he, in turn, is making his adjustments to adjust to their adjustments, if that makes sense. So in that article, you said you talked about Alex Wells. Nobody talks about Alex Wells anymore. This is a young kid out of Australia. I think he walked 19 hitters over 2 seasons at one point. Last year, the walk numbers were up, but he pitched to a 2.38 ERA over his last 8 starts to get his earned run average below 3.5. I talked to a scout last week who wasn't as high on Alex Wells as maybe I was or maybe other people are. What do you see from Alex Wells? Is that somebody who we can consider to be a legitimate rotation candidate in the future, or somebody who's more likely headed for the bullpen?
Well, it's kind of dovetailing what I said before. Those guys who don't have the premium velocity, who know how to manipulate a baseball, who know how to command it, their success is almost, it has to be earned. Someone like, and hopefully, I guess we could use Hunter Harvey as an example of this. Hunter Harvey hasn't had nearly the professional success that Alex Wells has. They're both in the Bowie rotation right now. Wells is a few years younger, obviously. They're both, in the same rotation, dealing with the same challenges. And because Hunter Harvey is a big, athletic-looking right-hander who throws 95, 96 with a hammer breaking ball, he doesn't have to have success. He could just be Hunter Harvey, and everyone will just project out how good he's going to be based on those things. With someone like Alex Wells, who doesn't have the premium velocity, I know scouts who just absolutely love him. He doesn't have, you're projecting out that the pitches are going to get better and that the success will continue to happen basically outside of the norm for that profile. So I think that's the difference. All of those guys, and Jon Means was in this bucket too, even if I didn't list them in that article and, kick myself for it to some extent. I mean, the Jon Means that is pitching now was not that Jon Means. If
nobody saw him coming.
If it was that guy, not necessarily the guy that he was, but those guys just have to do it. So someone like Alex Wells, who is, I believe he's off to a pretty good start at Bowie since he started the season there after coming off the minor league injured list. I think that's all you need to see. You just need to see him getting better. He needs to be near perfect with the stuff he has, but he's capable of doing that. He's shown that at the level he's at, he's been capable of being that successful. So I think that's, again, one of those guys who's going to have to do it at every level. It's unfair, but that's just kind of how it works.
Right, and it is good to see the Orioles have these young pitchers in their system, mainly at Delmarva, some at Frederick, some at Bowie, and Keegan Aiken at the AAA level, who are pitching well, and they're doing what the Houston Astros minor league organization did last year. They're striking out over 10 batters a game, which is huge for this ball club moving forward for the future, for this rebuild. And you have to think that there's an eye on the analytics now, that they're instilling some things that weren't here in the past that are making these guys pitch better. You tend to be more on the analytical side of things. Have you always been that way, or is that something that you kind of had to adapt to with the movement of baseball as a whole?
I actually started writing about baseball for a minor league website that covered the Red Sox system. So I was focused a lot on the scouting stuff going to games, but it really just seemed like a niche once I started covering the Orioles that wasn't really addressed that much on the team's beat. So I thought that would be a good way to kind of introduce myself, for lack of a better word. But it just seems like there's only so many ways to write about the game that everybody watches on television every single night. There's only so many ways to spin the pregame quotes that are blasted out on Masson and put on every website, and I guess we're the only newspaper, but every website that covers the team and every outlet is going to be doing that. So I think it's really, I just thought it was a way to, give a different perspective, and it's worked out pretty well because now that's how, the game is going. This is what's going to be driving a mix of scouting and player development and analytics, all these things that got me back into baseball, for lack of a better term, after I kind of drifted as a young person. That's all what's going on here, so it's kind of fun.
Right, and I know for me, I always say it on this show, I had that John Smoltz approach to baseball where I'm old school and I want to see batting average, on base percentage, home runs, RBIs. So I'm trying to get more onto the analytical side and the sabermetrician side of baseball, but it's been difficult for me. So it's nice to see that somebody else who's working in the field that I'm trying to work in kind of came up and learned along the way as well. So that's good to see. You also wrote an article the other day about how the bullpen earned rare acclaim. I think you said that they went 28 in the third innings without allowing a home run before Brandon Klein allowed a home run last night. Evan Phillips has struggled recently. Miguel Castro has struggled recently. Klein also has struggled recently. What are you seeing from the bullpen? And do you see improvement? Because they had gone a little bit without allowing a home run, or do you think it's going to have to be somebody else that they're going to have to call up? Already used 20 relievers out of that bullpen this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that group that they kind of, after Tanner Scott and Jimmy Yacobonis had been optioned, I think that group, granted they were put in really good situations. The Orioles got some longer starts. Everyone was rested. They weren't playing the big home run type teams that they have been playing in the Yankees and the Twins and the A's and the Red Sox. It's just really I think that the personnel that's there is going to be the ones that end up there. I just found it interesting, especially last night, and Nathan Ruiz, my colleague, wrote about it. Nights like last night, where you're talking about Evan Phillips and Miguel Castro, they were also responsible for the walk-off loss to the White Sox on Wednesday. The fact that there are people who are pitching well in this bullpen, you look at Paul Fry, you look at Gabriel Anoa, Jeffrey Ramirez, Michael Givens now is pitching well. The fact that there are people who are pitching well and there's some who aren't mean that it's an opportunity to almost analyze not so much the players, because the players are going to be inconsistent. They're young relievers. That's what's going to happen. But it's an opportunity to more analyze how Brandon Hyde's doing, how his in-game managing style is going to jive with, yesterday he said that Brandon Klein came in for the fifth inning because he was already warmed up. That's a perfectly legitimate reason. He said Evan Phillips pitched in ninth, even though Gabriel Anoa had used 36, 37 pitches in 3 innings because he hadn't pitched in 5 days. That maybe not. I mean, this was still a one-run game at that point. And that's the type of thing that, that's almost like a spring training mentality. I don't know. So it's more interesting, not so much the guys. I mean, you're going to cycle out a AAA reliever for a guy who's not doing well in the big leagues, and you're going to have, a good AAA. You're just going to swap out a good AAA reliever and a guy who's not doing well in the big leagues. They're going to just flip roles. They're going to go down to AAA and they're going to do well, and they're going to come up here and they're going to have 2 good outings and 1 really bad one. That's just how it's going to work. But I think it's more interesting to see how it's developed and how they're deployed more so than the actual guys themselves.
And it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback when you look at Noah last night, and he's pitching to that .79 ERA since he's come up to the big league club. I mean, he's pitching well till he's not, right? So he goes those 3 innings last night. He throws, you said, somewhere between 36 and 40 pitches. It's easy to sit here the day after and be like, oh, well, you should have left him in, but that's not how baseball works. So, for Hyde to go out there and get him, that's something that he thought could work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Last night it didn't work out. Evan Phillips wasn't anywhere near the strike zone. So you did happen to mention that the bullpen was pitching better because starters were getting longer starts. Had the opposite of that yesterday. David Hess, he's now down to 1-4 with a 5.5 ERA. 5 of his 7 starts, he's gone 5 innings or less. He's allowed 10 home runs in just over 34 innings. Is this a guy who's long to stay in this rotation? He did pitch to a 3.88 ERA last year over his last 10 starts. We hoped it would continue this year, and we're not seeing that from him this year, save for that first start.
Yeah, it seems like he's in the position of, and it's kind of what he was even when he came up last year. He's a guy who's got a good fastball. He doesn't have perfect command, and he doesn't have that one pitch that he's going to just rely on, the way that Jon Meoli has his changeup now, the way that Dylan Bundy used his slider for so long once he finally started throwing it again, the way Kevin Gossman's splitter was when he was, trying to make that next step. At times, David Hess's slider has been that. His breaking ball has been that. He uses kind of a split change type thing, the way Alex Cobb does. But he doesn't really have that one pitch that he knows he could locate, that he knows he could bury with 2 strikes, that he knows is going to be his out pitch. And guys who don't have that run into trouble because that's how those long at-bats happen. He threw 90-something pitches in 4 innings yesterday. Those long at-bats happen because there's not that one put-away pitch. And that's kind of where he's at right now. Now, is that something that, can you learn a big league put-away pitch at AAA? Maybe. Do you learn how to put away big league hitters at AAA? Not really. Like, that's something that he's had basically a year to do now on the fly. And I think that's really, I think the Orioles are in a better position to accommodate that now than they were last year, but I'm not really sure how long that leash will be. Now, is this a situation where we talk about Gabriel Ynoa, we talk about Jeffrey Ramirez? Those are really the guys over the guys in AAA who would be the rotation candidates if you weren't going to go with him, but how much better, like I said, when you're swapping, a good AAA reliever for, an inconsistent major league reliever, are you going to get the same types of performances out of those guys, which is David Hess behind them in the bullpen? So it's kind of a balancing situation there.
Right, and you speak of Gabriel Ynoa maybe using him in a starting role. You really would hate to rob Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, to get him into the rotation. That would mean that you have to put Hess into the bullpen, and Ynoa's been so strong out of that bullpen. I would really hate to see them change his role out of necessity more than anything else, because he's doing the job that he needs to do. And Brendan Hyde even said last night that this is a guy who's starting to pitch himself into high leverage situations. So how do you feel about that? I can't imagine that they would want to put him in a starting role since he's doing so well out of the bullpen.
Yeah, I think that was the direction they're more talking about going to. But I think he's just the type of player who he has a really, really good breaking ball. He always has. But I think that you talk about him, I keep putting him in the same category, but Jeffrey Ramirez, really good changeup. These guys with it's okay now to be just a 2-pitch guy. You need a third pitch? Yeah, kind of, but you're not going to be shamed for throwing your best breaking ball a lot in this new Orioles way. As opposed to, it's not going to be, Gabriel Ynoa needs a better changeup. It's, he has a good slider. So, just use that. And I think that's the type of thing that, to kind of go back to David Hess, he needs to find that pitch. So whether Gabriel Ynoa could do this 2 times through a lineup, 3 times through a lineup versus as well as he does it once, that's like one of those things. You're basically taking away a strength for a question mark. And that's something that they'll have to address, I suppose, going forward.
Right. Well, hey, Jon, we really appreciate you coming on the show today, man. I'm sure you have to get down to the ballpark for tonight's game pretty soon here.
Yeah, no, I'm just glad. My cat's been running around for the whole time. I'm just glad he didn't climb on me. He used the litter box. He he's been like clawing at the window. I'm just glad he didn't climb like across the screen and create like an internet moment. So
Oh, no worries. He did that before we came on while you were fixing the lighting, so I think he got that out of the way. So John,
you got his stage time.
yeah, absolutely. So hey, John, great stuff, man. Thanks for coming on. Hope to talk to you again soon. All right.
Hey, appreciate it. Talk soon.
Absolutely. And that's going to do it for us here on the Payoff Pitch, presented by D&L Window Tinting on Fanimal Radio. I'm Paul Valley. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.